Well, Academy Award-winning filmmaker and actor Ron Howard returned to Butte County this week as his Imagine Entertainment crew did more filming for his documentary. Action News Now reporter Laura Eng has more.
Ron Howard's visit struck a chord with several of the campfire survivors I spoke with today.
They told you the story of Opie Taylor, the freckle-faced kid who could do no wrong. They told you Richie Cunningham was the golden boy. They told you Ron Howard's rise was the American dream. Easy, wholesome, perfect. But what if everything you thought you knew was only half the story? Behind the smiles, behind the laughs, behind the Emmy-winning moments, there was tension, secrets, a darkness the cameras never captured, a co-star who made childhood unbearable, a marriage that Hollywood assumed was untouchable, and a reckoning decades in the making. This is the story you weren't supposed to see, the truth behind the smile. Born to observe. Ron Howard didn't stumble into show business, he was born into it. And not in the casual, metaphorical way people say that. Literally, genetically, from his very first breath. His father, Rance Howard, was born Rance Beckenholt and had taken a stage name years before Ron arrived. His mother, Jean Spiegel Howard, was an actress herself. So the Howard household wasn't just supportive of the arts, it was the arts. Dinner table conversation was show business. The language of storytelling was the family's first language. Ron made his screen debut at 18 months old in a film called Frontier Woman. He made his stage debut at 2 years old in a production of The 7-Year Itch. Let that sink in. Most 2-year-olds are learning to walk without falling. Ron Howard was already hitting his marks. By the time he was 3, his father was coaching him using dialogue from Mr. Roberts as an audition piece. He appeared on live anthology television, including Playhouse 90, and had a recurring role in Dennis the Menace. His education split itself between 2 worlds simultaneously: the classrooms of Burbank schools and the studios of Despised, where he was tutored between takes as a working child actor. But the moment that changed everything came almost by accident. Ron appeared in an episode of General Electric Theater, hosted by Ronald Reagan, playing a boy named Barnaby who desperately wanted a dog. That performance caught the eye of producer Sheldon Leonard, who was building a new series around a Southern sheriff named Andy Taylor. And here's the part most people don't know. The Andy Griffith Show was actually second in line for Ron Howard.
Andy Griffith is known for enforcing the law in Mayberry, but soon he could become a part of state law.
Another show had already cast him first. It was only that series' failure to sell that freed him up for Mayberry. And Andy Griffith himself later confirmed it in a 2003 interview with Larry King. We were second in line for him. His show didn't sell, so we got him. A failed pilot that nobody remembers gave us one of the most beloved child performances in television history. Funny how that works. On October 3, 1960, 6-year-old Ron Howard, credited as Ronnie Howard, walked onto the set of The Andy Griffith Show for the very first time. His first scene involved a toy turtle he had to pretend was dead. He recalled Griffith looking at the turtle with him and gently talking through how funny it was to pretend something that small was real. It was a relaxed first impression. Calm, unhurried, warm. But what the set actually looked like behind the wholesome exterior was something else entirely. Ron later described the crew at Despised as salty old characters who swore like sailors and drank like fishes, with cigarettes burning constantly on set. My eyes were always burning, he recalled. Mayberry was immaculate on screen. The studio was decidedly not. His parents, to their credit, kept a firm boundary around his childhood. They didn't care how much money there was to be made, Ron once said. They wanted me only to do the Griffith Show, and maybe one thing during the off-season, and that was that. And something else was quietly happening on that set. Something that had nothing to do with performance. When Ron was just 10 years old, a director, pulled him aside and said, "I see the way you're looking at the camera and following rehearsals, even when you're not in the scenes. I have a feeling you're going to be a director." The boy America was watching on screen was already watching everything back. Mayberry's Hidden Truths. The Andy Griffith Show ran from October 3, 1960 to April 1, 1968. 249 episodes, 8 seasons. It never ranked lower than 7th in the Nielsen ratings, and in a feat that only I Love Lucy and Seinfeld can match, it ended its final season at number 1. The show was, by every measurable standard, a phenomenon. On screen, it looked effortless. Andy Griffith as the steady, wise Sheriff Taylor. Don Knotts as the hilariously inept Deputy Barney Fife. Frances Bavier as the warm, nurturing Aunt Bee. And little Opie, Ron Howard, at the center of it all, wide-eyed and curious. The moral compass of Mayberry wrapped in a small boy's body. What the audience saw was family. What was actually happening behind those cameras was considerably more complicated. Frances Bavier was television royalty, raised in New York City, trained in theater, precise in her craft. She was, by every professional standard, exceptional. But she was also deeply private, deliberate in her distance from the rest of the cast, and exacting in ways that could turn a simple scene into an ordeal. Howard Morris, who played Ernest T. Bass and directed several episodes of the show, once described working with Bavier as navigating a landmine. Something as minor as asking her to shift a few inches for a camera angle could trigger a response that shut down the entire set. Now, she was particular about her space, her presentation, and her process. And any challenge to any of those things was met with a resistance that went beyond professionalism into something more personal. For young Ron Howard, sharing scenes with her was not the cozy experience audiences imagined. She was cold. She didn't warm to him the way Griffith did. She didn't guide him or joke with him between takes. She was simply there, present in the scene, unreachable outside of it. And for a child who had grown up in a warm, collaborative family where show business was a form of shared joy, that iciness was jarring in a way that stayed with him. There's a famous episode, The Pickle Story, where Opie has to eat jar after jar of Aunt Bee's homemade pickles.
The pickle episode on the Andy Griffith Show.
And here's the surprise. Some of my new homemade pickles.
Which in the story are notoriously terrible. Here's what audiences didn't know was that Ron Howard genuinely, deeply hated pickles. Multiple takes, multiple jars, over and over again. And the person sitting across from him in those scenes was the one cast member he could never quite connect with. He never said it bitterly. He never attacked her publicly. He simply never pretended it was something it wasn't. Andy Griffith himself tried to bridge the gap. He once drove to Bavier's home unannounced, hoping a personal visit might soften something between them. It didn't. She was fiercely protective of her privacy, and the surprise arrival deepened the wall rather than dismantling it. But here is where the story shifts. Because near the end of her life, Frances Bavier was diagnosed with cancer, and in that final chapter, something in her changed. She picked up the phone and called Andy Griffith. She told him she was sorry they hadn't gotten along better. She said it was her fault. She acknowledged his leadership, his grace, and the role he played in the show's success. It was a deathbed reconciliation, imperfect, incomplete, but real. She passed away in 1989 at 86, having spent her final years in Siler City, North Carolina.
Siler City was often mentioned on the Andy Griffith Show.
The very state her character had called home. Ron Howard watched all of it, absorbed all of it, filed it away in that place where artists keep the experiences that quietly shape everything they do later. Hollywood's quiet rebellion. When the Andy Griffith Show ended in 1968, Ron Howard was 14 years old. By 1974, he was back on television as Richie Cunningham in Happy Days. Wholesome, clean cut, at the steady center of a show that would make Henry Winkler's Fonzie a cultural icon. Howard played the straight man beautifully. He always did. But the most important thing happening in Ron Howard's life during this period had nothing to do with cameras. He was 16 when he met Cheryl, two teenagers in California, both with bigger dreams than their current zip codes could hold. He had the freckles and the famous red hair. She had a quiet strength and a presence that, by his own account, he never got over. Their first date was straight out of a 1970s time capsule. Ron picked her up in a mint green Volkswagen Beetle, took her to the movies, and then they got pizza. Simple, completely uncinematic. Exactly the kind of evening that turns into a life. He knew early. But Cheryl wasn't in a rush. But when he proposed, the first time, she said no. The second time, no again. She had things she wanted to do first. A future she needed to shape for herself before attaching it to his. She was, as their daughter Bryce would later describe her, a force of nature who kept everyone grounded, even Ron, especially Ron. He proposed a third time. She said yes. On June 7, 1975, they stood in Burbank and said, "I do." The guest list included friends, family, and a handful of Happy Days co-stars, including the late Tom Bosley. Ron had just started on the sitcom the year before. Life was moving at a pace that would have overwhelmed most people. But Cheryl was his constant. That's the word he uses. Constant. 50 years later, on June 7, 2025, Ron Howard posted a photo of the two of them standing on a beach at sunset. No red carpet, a no publicist-approved statement. Just two people in the warm glow of twilight who had chosen each other every single day for half a century. He wrote that their life together was like a river ride. Calm waters, tricky rapids, and the commitment to keep paddling. For their anniversary in 2023, he surprised her by taking her for a drive in that same mint green VW Beetle. Yes, the original one. They took the long way, let the wind in, remembered where it started. In Hollywood, a city that treats marriage like a renewable contract, what Ron and Cheryl built is almost a form of rebellion. Oscar nights, human costs. By the time the new millennium arrived, Ron Howard had been in Hollywood for 4 decades. He'd gone from child actor to director through sheer force of will. Starting with a scrappy 1977 low-budget film called Grand Theft Auto, graduating to Splash with Tom Hanks in 1984, and steadily building a body of work that people respected without always fully reckoning with. Then came 2001, A Beautiful Mind. The true story of John Nash, a brilliant Princeton mathematician who developed paranoid schizophrenia and spent decades battling a mind that was simultaneously his greatest gift and his most dangerous enemy. Russell Crowe played Nash with a ferocity that felt physical. Jennifer Connelly, Ed Harris, and Paul Bettany surrounded him in a cast that operated like a symphony. The film swept the Oscars. Best Picture, Best Director for Howard, Best Supporting Actress for Connelly, Best Adapted Screenplay, on the kind of night that defines careers. And then the criticism arrived. The film had left things out. Nash's bisexuality, a documented, meaningful part of who he was absent. A child he'd fathered outside his marriage and never supported was missing from the narrative. The edges of Nash's life, the ones that complicated the inspiring arc Howard wanted to tell, had been softened. Critics didn't whisper about it. They said it plainly. This film had been sanitized. A real human being had been smoothed into a more palatable version of himself for the sake of a cleaner story. Howard acknowledged it. He explained that the focus was always the mind, the illness, the survival, not a complete biography. But he also admitted that the backlash bothering him most wasn't the professional criticism. It was watching it affect Nash personally. When the controversy started to land on the real man, a living person who had already survived more than most, Howard felt that weight in a different way. Telling someone else's story, he learned, carries a responsibility that doesn't end when the credits roll. It was a lesson he would carry forward. The politics of storytelling. A few years ago, Ron Howard made a film called Hillbilly Elegy for Netflix. It was based on the best-selling memoir by J.D. Vance, a raw, complicated portrait of poverty, addiction, family dysfunction, and improbable survival in Appalachian, Ohio. Howard approached it as he approaches everything, with research, care, and a genuine desire to understand a world that wasn't his own. At the time, Vance wasn't a politician. He wasn't a senator. He wasn't anywhere near the national political stage. He was a writer, but a Yale law graduate, a man who had told a personal story with enough honesty to make millions of people recognize something in it. That suited Howard perfectly. He wasn't looking for an ideological partner. He was looking for a story worth telling. But people change, or perhaps more accurately, people reveal themselves over time. As Vance moved into politics, as his public rhetoric shifted and hardened into something Howard found both surprising and deeply troubling, the director began to speak up, not with the volume of someone looking for a fight, with the quiet, measured clarity of someone who has spent decades watching human beings reveal their true characters. On screen, on set, and in life, and knows exactly what he's seeing. He didn't rage. He didn't produce a takedown. He reminded people to think critically, to look closely, and above all, to vote. Because he understood, perhaps better than most, how easily a compelling narrative can obscure an uncomfortable truth. He'd learned it from a cold co-star when he was 6 years old. He'd navigated it in the editing room with a beautiful mind. And now, he was watching it play out on the national stage in real time. The boy who once sat across from Francis Bavier and learned that warmth on screen doesn't guarantee warmth behind it had never really forgotten that lesson. He'd just been waiting for the right moment to say it out loud. For nearly 70 years, the world has watched Ron Howard. From a freckle-faced boy eating pickles he hated, to a teenager navigating the ordinary chaos of adolescence, to a director standing under Hollywood's brightest lights. Every moment has been cataloged, analyzed, celebrated. But what most people never see is the story in between. The quiet decisions, the invisible lessons, the choices no camera can capture. He built a career that spans generations. He built a family that thrives despite the pressures of fame. He survived the heartbreaks, the public missteps, the scrutiny, and the relentless pace of an industry that rarely rewards patience, humility, or steadfastness. And through it all, he remained genuinely himself. Not a persona, not a brand. A human being navigating life one imperfect, courageous step at a time. But here's the thing. Fame is finite. Awards don't last. Crowds dissipate. And yet, some stories, the ones that really matter, are measured not by the noise they make, but by the quiet ways they endure. The lessons learned when no one is watching. The integrity maintained when the world expects you to compromise. The love and attention given to others, even when life offers no guarantees in return. Ron Howard's story is still unfolding. The cameras may not be rolling, but the choices, the challenges, and the quiet triumphs continue. And it forces a question that lingers long after the lights go down. When the applause fades and the scripts end, how will the next chapter be written? And what truths will it reveal about the man who once was Opie Taylor and is now something far more extraordinary? Because this isn't just the story of a Hollywood legend. It's the story of a life lived deliberately, fully, and with attention that most of us can only aspire to. And the next act? That part hasn't been filmed yet, hasn't been filmed yet, hasn't been filmed yet.